So we wait for 1 more minute and then we start. Okay. So welcome to the session. So today we are discussing about the JavaScript basics. Okay, I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Yes, Father.
Yeah, okay. So in order to learn React, the fundamental thing is JavaScript. We have to learn JavaScript first, and then on top of that, we have to work on React. Okay, this is how we have to learn. But to understand JavaScript, we need to understand the environment itself. Okay, the kind of environment that is needed to run this JavaScript. Okay, so if JavaScript could run on a particular environment, anything that we are building on top of JavaScript, that it can be React or Angular or it can be Amber.js or whatever it is, it can run on the same environment. Okay, so what kind of environment do we need to run the specific code that we are writing in JavaScript? Okay, so the environment that we need is any kind of platform that has a JavaScript engine. Okay, so if you see the browsers, so if you see Google Chrome, it has a V8 engine, Chrome's V8 engine, basically. Okay, this V8 engine is helpful to run the JavaScript that we write. At the same time, Mozilla Firefox. Okay, so it has again SpiderMonkey engine, that is again JavaScript engine. Okay, it is the engine that runs our JavaScript. And again, Safari, it has JavaScript core or something else. Okay, and at the same time, we do have Node. Of course, we are not touching that one, but thing is that Node itself is an environment where we can run our JavaScript, because the node is having the JavaScript engine again, that is V8 engine again. Okay, this is the kind of environment we do need to run our JavaScript. Okay, it is not just the specific environment that I'm going to show you now, but even you can use Node. Okay, think you can see the screen, right? So you can simply see the browser.
Yes.
Okay, so let me show you how we can run a snippets of code that we write in JavaScript in the browser itself. Okay, so here you can go to sources. So you may not see snippets initially, but the time when you choose this one, you can see snippets. Okay, this is how you can open snippets. You can add snippet like this. Okay, if you want to give some kind of naming, you can give the name. So the JavaScript basics we are learning through these snippets. Okay, so we can run the piece of code here and we can test. Let us suppose there is something else like make sure that what's happening. Okay, we have to save it actually. Okay, Control S. What I chose is Control S. Now right click and run. Okay, see, we see this getting loaded. This is okay. So don't consider about this one. Okay, this is not relevant to our log actually. This is irrelevant and don't consider that one. Okay? So we are writing pieces of code here and we are seeing the output here, and that's how we are learning the fundamentals in JavaScript. Okay, clear? Okay, so today we are learning about variables. Okay, if you see, we if we work any kind of language, okay, if you want to learn any kind of language or if you want to work on any kind of language, obviously we have to work on the data. Okay, unless we have data, nothing we can work on. Okay, we need to have data and at the same time logics. These are the two things we need to have. Okay, the fundamental thing that we need to maintain data in JavaScript is variables. These variables also called identifiers. Okay, most of the developers don't use this terminology, identifiers. They generally use variables. Okay, how can we declare variables and how can you work with variables? What kind of data that you can store in variables? Those kind of questions or those kind of talk, usually we do have. Okay, so the JavaScript identifier or the JavaScript variables usually starts with a letter, uh, alphabets basically, like A, B, C, D, and so on to Z. Okay, and they can sometimes start with underscore, sometimes start with a dollar. Okay, this is the convention we do follow usually. Okay, it is not something like starting with numbers or starting with special characters, except underscore and dollar sign. Okay, so we don't prefer to define variables starting with some kind of special characters. Okay, most of the time I prefer to follow the naming convention of starting the variables with alphabets. Okay, so these alphabets are Unicode letters basically. Unicode letters in the sense, so whatever the letters that we have in this world basically have a specific kind of code. Each letter, each letter would have a letter. Suppose if you see German letters or French letters or Spanish letters, okay, they have some kind of letters actually we don't follow, some kind of stressing letters. Okay, we don't see them in English basically. Okay, those are Unicode letters. Okay, each letter would maintain a particular code. If you see if you see that that letter respective code, we can see the letter respective code in the language. That's why we call them Unicode letters. Okay, of course it is three. I'm not mm, let me show you. See, these are the codes basically. Sometimes we may have to work with these codes in order to understand what kind of letter that user has entered. Okay, care code it. Okay, so this is a kind of code that is attached to each letter. Okay, so you see any kind of Unicodes being used in the variables naming basically. Okay, it can so we see. So these are the letters. Okay, these kind of letters we can make use in defining the identifiers, nothing but variables. Okay, So how can we define variables? So this is how we are defining identifiers, declaring identifiers, nothing but variables. So here X is the identifier or the variable that is holding some kind of data. Okay, what kind of data we will be discussing later, but we are focusing today on this identifier. Okay, what are the ways we can define these identifiers? Okay, so um, how can I check the data of this variable? As I mentioned, console.log x. Okay, this is the one. Okay, so in how many ways we can define these identifiers? Okay, traditionally, JavaScript has introduced one thing, that is var. Using var keyword, this is the keyword basically. This is the keyword. Okay, 1 second. One second, I'm getting this one.
To our videos, please email us at support@naukri.com. Also, do like and share this video and subscribe to our channel by clicking on the button appearing on your screen. Thank
Can you please mute yourself? Okay. So what are the ways we are going to define these variables? Where is the one that traditionally JavaScript has given to us? Okay, using where, but it does have some issues. Okay, those may not be issues, but by nature, that is how it works basically. Okay, so if you see, this is how we are declaring a variable. Okay, next. So if you try to see where this variable is getting created, okay, how? This is the variable that we are creating, right? So by default, the variable that we are creating gets created in the global scope. So here the global scope is window. Okay. How can we access this global scope window? Using global this. Okay. So global this dot x. See, if you see the time when you create a variable with where in the global scope, see, you are not defining these variables inside any function or inside any block. By default, you are defining in the global scope. Okay? Means that it is not inside any function, inside any block. That's why we say that these variables are being created in the global scope. Then we can see those variables in the global this object. Okay. Now, so as I mentioned, this is the global scope. Okay. Then how is it going to be in function scope? Function. See, we are just defining a function. Okay. Defining function or declaring function is not the invocation of the function. Here I just declared a function. Now the invocation of the function is I'm just triggering this function. This is how we trigger this function. Okay, run. So if you see, just deleting this one. So if you see here, this time 20 got logged, right? But can you access this scope? Because that is defined inside this function. The scope of this variable is up to this function. If you try to access, if you think, if you see, the value of x still be 10 that we executed previously. Okay, it is still maintaining that state. Okay, that is secondary. But thing is that the variable that we created inside the function, it is limited to that function. It is not to the global scope. Okay, can we access? Can a function access the global variables? Yes, it can access, but the global scope. Let us suppose we are defining another variable. Let p. Okay, now p. Now try to access this variable. Can we access this variable? Because the scope of this variable is specific to this function. Okay, it is not accessible from the global functionality. Okay, if a variable is declared globally, okay, then in such a case we can access this global variable. But thing is that if we declare a function scoped variable or a block scoped variable, we cannot access those variables outside, from outside, means from global scope. Okay, I think my point is clear, but let me run this code so that you would be clear. See, here I'm declaring a global variable that is t, that is holding the value 10, and here again I am declaring a local variable that is holding the value 20. Okay, now let me save this one. So let me run this so that you will. Okay, so if you see here, initially we saw 20 and 10, t representing 10, 20 and 10 being logged. Okay, so that is fine. But the time then when you are trying to access a variable, okay, which is not defined, but you are trying to access it, right? So you are trying to pull the value of p, but p is not defined in the global scope, and the global scope is not in a position to access the function scope, right? That's why we don't see p being defined in the global scope, and we do see reference error. So we have to understand the scope of variables before trying to access them. I hope my point is clear. Okay, so I just want to give you one example. I want you to say answer on this. Okay, if you have any doubts, please ask me. Okay, rise in the middle of the class so that I'll tell you. What's happening? Initially, the browser, for security reasons, it may not allow you to paste the code. Okay, so you have to accept it by saying hello pasting. Okay, so now, so this is what I have written, right? Let us suppose I am writing it as 11 this time. Okay, so what is the possible value that we can see here, or do we see any issue? So we see 11. Okay, do you think for any possible reasons we do get some issues or some other value, any of you, because your understanding is very important to me. Okay, so what is the possible value that we can get here? Because this kind of simple questions we may get in interview questions. Okay, your understanding is quite important.
I
Okay,
think it may give error because we are redefining the variable x. It might,
okay,
because
so
it is already stored in the browser, right?
but again, yeah, so if it is already stored in the browser, okay, again we are declaring. That's what your point, right? Yeah, okay. You have brought very valid point that I'm going to discuss. Okay, but thing is that where variables can be redeclared, where variables can be redeclared. So we don't see any issue with this redeclaring where variable. No issue.
Okay.
No issues. We don't see any issues. Okay. Now tell me, what is the possible value that we are going to get here?
11.
Exactly, 11. So 11 is the answer. Okay. So the time when you are the time when JavaScript engine executing this function, it first checks whether this variable is existed in the local scope or not, means the function scope or not. If it is not there, then in such a case, it look for the variable existence in its upper scope. That's how it is. This is called scope chain. Again, I'm telling the time when JavaScript executing a piece of code and is trying to access any variable, it first checks the existence of this variable within the scope of that block or function. If that variable is not existed within that scope, then it looks for the upper scope, its upper scope, function upper scope. Here in this case, it is global scope. Yes, the variable is declared in the global scope. Now we are seeing the value 11. Okay, that's how it is. Here we learned one more point, scope chain. What is scope chain? Scope chain is nothing but the time when JavaScript is executing a piece of code, it looks for the references of variables. Okay, so if the references of variables are found within the scope of that function or block, then there is no problem and the respective value will be used. If they are not found, in such a case, the upper scope of the function would be verified to check these variables are existed or not. If it is not existed, then that is different case. I'm going to explain you that one. Okay, but if it is existed, then it is going to use that variable. Okay, now it made me to bring one more point. Okay, what if that variable is itself is not existed? Let us suppose I am writing one more variable q. Okay, the q variable itself is not there. Okay, so what do we get? What issue do we get? Issue or something? Okay, what is your guess in this case?
Undefined.
Undefined, because the variable itself is not defined. It is not declared. It is not
I
at all
think,
existed.
yeah, we get an error.
Yeah, we do get error. The reason is that it is not yet existed.
Yeah.
It is not yet existed. See, there are two differences. Let me tell you. I am saying q is equal to 10 or 12 this time. Now, the JavaScript engine tries to check the variable in this scope. Okay, the time the JavaScript is engine executing this code, it first tries to pull the reference of this variable. Okay, q. Where is this variable declared? I am talking about the line number 3, not line number 4. I am talking about specifically line number 3. The time when JavaScript engine executing this code, this line of code, it tries to find the variable q. because it wants to assign the value 12 to that variable q. Okay, if that variable is not found within that scope, function scope, then it tries to verify if that variable q is defined in the global scope, in the upper scope here in this case. Okay, that is the global scope. In the global scope also, the q is not defined. Then what it does is that it defines that variable q. It defines that variable. It declares that variable in the global scope and assigns 12. Okay, so here in this case, the q is declared in the global scope and the value 12 is assigned and the 12 gets logged. But if we comment this line and run, because q is not yet declared in the global scope, right? So the time when we are, this is called using, this is assignment. Assignment is different from consuming. Remember, this is assignment. The time when you are assigning some data to a variable, the existence of variable is verified. Okay, but the time when you are trying to pull the data itself, it tries to verify the existence of the variable. So if it is not existed, the error would be thrown. Let me run this one. So we are getting q is not defined. Now I am defined. So my intention is I want to create a variable q inside this function, but I'm not declaring with var keyword. Okay, I'm not declaring with var keyword. I was with the assumption that the q variable might be defined somewhere in the global scope, and I'm reassigning that. I'm reassigning it to 12 basically. Okay, so now, but the reality is that q is not defined in the global scope, and I am trying to assign the value 12 to q. So thing is that as it is not available in the global scope yet, so first it initially tries to verify in the local scope. So is the q existed or not? Okay, it is not existed, then it is going to global scope and it is verifying if it is q existed or not. Then it is not existed, then it is creating the variable q. Now I'm running this one. So the 12. The point is, I think the point is clear, right? See, the assignment is different from the making use of or referring the variable. Is that clear? Any doubts?
So we don't need to define, I mean, declare that before accessing that.
So ideally, we have to declare. That is the best practice. We have to declare. If we do not declare them, and if you want to assign, you are polluting the global scope. That is the issue we see. Is that clear? We don't need to. We don't need to. Okay. If you don't, nothing will happen actually. If you see here, you are defining and then logging and everything is working, right? There is no problem. But thing is that unknowingly we are polluting the global scope. Here the global scope is, see, this global this dot q. See, we are creating. Are we not polluting the global scope here? So this is the nature how it works basically, the JavaScript itself. Any questions or doubts? It is not the best practice actually. It is not the best practice, but I'm telling you the issue.
This means the q variable can access in other function, right?
Q variable can be accessed because it is specific to this function, right?
Yeah.
It is specific to this function. It can't be accessed in other functions.
But the reference is global, right? So why can't we access?
Yes, now if you try to, but ideally what would be your expectation? Ideally what would be your expectation? You think I am, so you may think that the time when you are writing this one, you see, developers have to understand the each line of code that they are writing. Okay, so one developer has written this one. His intention is that he wants to use it in local scope. Okay, unknowingly it became it is in the global scope. Okay, so now it is in the global scope. Thing is that if you rely on this global scope, sometime later, if he wants to try to make it in the local scope, the entire functionality would be broken, right? So we have to understand where we want to scope these variables while we are defining. Okay, that is the purpose of this session actually. Okay, so now in this case, yeah, this q variable is already declared in the time as it is executed, as the function itself got executed and the variable got declared in the global scope. Now if you write some other function like so function now you see q being popped up here. Okay, you don't see any issues, but ideally this is not the right approach. It is not the right approach to declare variables, right? That is not the way. That's what my point is. Okay, so you can access here. Okay, that got logged here. Okay, I'm sorry. We have see now we see 12 being logged 2 times. Okay, but ideally this is not the approach. Understand? Now how can you stop it? So that's why use strict is there. Use strict. So let us suppose now it is not Q because the Q is already defined in the global scope. The state is maintained. That's why I'm taking R. R. See, R is not defined. Sometimes you may be asked the question, why do we need use strict? Okay, because we are stopping polluting global scope. Any problem in understanding? See, here we found one problem. The problem is that unknowingly, the developers, there is a possibility that developers can pollute the global scope. How? If they do not use any keyword while they are declaring a variable, while they are assigning a particular value to a variable, that variable gets created in the global scope. How can we restrict it? Okay. The solution is that use strict. Okay. This is the one that we can use to overcome that issue. Okay. Okay. It won't allow you to pollute this global scope. Is that clear? Any issues? Any problems? If you are clear, then we can go ahead. Clear?
So, yeah, Bala, use strict, is it a keyword? Or,
Yeah. Okay.
will
So
it access with the string?
so one thing actually, so use strict basically is the one. Use strict basically a simple expression. Okay, if browsers support, then they do execute the code in a specified manner, in an optimized manner, in a secured manner. if old browsers may not understand the use strict. Okay, in such a case, use strict is simple an expression basically. Okay, a simple expression. Okay, so it doesn't do anything if the browsers do not understand. But if they understand, then the way they understand, the way they process the JavaScript code is different from the normal way. Okay, that is without use strict. Okay, with use strict, that's why with use strict we can stop many issues being populated. That would solve many issues actually. Use strict. Okay, but this is one of the issues. What is the use of use strict? It would stop polluting the global scope. How? So try to assign a variable. Try to assign a particular data to a variable inside a function or inside a block. Then it tries to verify the existence of the variable inside that block of the function scope. Okay. If it is not available in such a case, it tries to verify the same variable existence in the global scope. Even if it is not existed, if it is not existed there also, then in such a case, it creates that variable. So it is polluting the global scope. So we have to stop this kind of polluting. Okay, right? That's why we do need use strict. Is that clear?
So now if we run this program, it will still throw the error.
Yes, it throws. So the use strict can be, you can declare on the top, otherwise inside a function, anywhere you can. Okay, if it is inside the function, it would be applicable to only to this part. If it is global in such a case, it is applicable to all the code that you are writing. Okay, clear?
Yeah.
So I want to take, yes, this time I think I have used or. Let me use or. Okay, what would be the value that's going to be logged? Just think. I'll explain you. Okay, no worries. Because each line of code that you are going to write, you have to understand. Let us suppose if you get a simple question, we should be in a position to think and answer it. That is very important. Just think.
20 only.
Or can you explain why it can be 20?
It will just it is not present in the, not defined in the inner function.
Excellent.
It will just check in the upper scope, which is
excellent. So it is not defined or not declared, okay, inside this function. What it does, okay, obviously it checks in the upper scope. Okay, this variable is existed or not. Yes, this variable is existed. It logs 20. So it logs 20. Any doubts? Okay. Any doubts? Because your understanding is quite important to me. Okay.
Can we access its parent scope variable, like value defined the value 10? Can we access in the inner function in any way?
But if you see the here the variable r is declared in the global scope, and the variable r is declared again in the function scope. So the time when function innerf is being called, the scope of innerf is verified for r. Okay, if it is not there, then it checks its upper scope. here the upper scope is again F, right? So the time when the upper scope F is verified, yes, R is existed. If it is not here, in such a case, then it would verify in the global scope and then try to pull that value. Okay, it is clear, because we are verifying for R. Yes, if R is existed in the inner scope, then why would it check the global scope or any upper scope? It doesn't have any meaning, right? So if at all, if it wants to access the global scope variable, it should have a different declaration, right? Some, yes, this time. Okay, so it should have some different, and then you have to call yes, right? So this is how we can access. This is how scope chain works. I hope this is clear. Okay, so what would be the outcome? So because X is already defined, already it is existed, I am defining with S now. Okay, now tell me.
Undefined.
So you are saying two answers.
Variable is undefined,
So variable is
not defined.
not defined. So
Not defined.
without declaring a variable, we are trying to access this variable. Okay, right? Then we do get reference error. We are trying to pull the value that S is referencing. So there is no reference for S basically because we haven't declared it. We do get error, reference error. Okay, so let me tell you where S is equal to 21. This is a new this is again a new point I'm going to bring in now. Okay, so now I have declared a variable S and I'm assigning the value 20. But before declaring that variable, I am trying to consuming it. Okay, so here the time when you declare a variable with where, there is a simple concept that is going to happen. That is variable hoisting. Okay, how does variable hoisting work? Before executing this piece of code, JavaScript engine would verify, oh, are there any variables or are there any functions which are declared in this block of code? Okay, if there are any variables that are declared, okay, it creates a kind of memory allocation for them, like where, yes, okay. So this is how it would create, okay. But ideally, the only declaration would be hoisted. It is not the assignment. It is not the assignment. Only the declaration is hoisted. I'm talking about where, okay. The time when you declare a where variable, and before you declaring it, you are trying to consuming it, okay, in the same scope. It is not in the different scope again, okay. If it is in the different scope, we do see reference error. There is no doubt in that. Let us suppose. Okay, let me get into this one first and then we check that one. Okay, now what happens is that the time JavaScript engine tries to execute this piece of code, it tries to verify if there are any variables declared or not. If there are any var variables declared in such a case, it would take the declaration, only the declaration to the top of the scope, top of to that scope, okay. So the time when it takes it to the top of the scope, the value of S is going to be undefined. Undefined. The value of S is going to be undefined. So once this setup is done, thus variable hoisting is done, it would execute the code. Okay, this is how it happens. Okay, now what would be the value? The value would be undefined. Okay, let me try to find. Is this clear? Do we have any questions on this? Any questions? The variable is getting hoisted. Only the declaration is hoisted. The var variable declaration is hoisted. Okay, the value is going to be undefined, and we will see the value undefined here in this case. Okay, undefined. Okay, now so what is the value of t?
Undefined.
Right? Do you see any other value that is being populated here? Anyone? Agree, right? It is undefined. So then what would be the value of t here?
Still undefined.
Again undefined, because this is what it is the engine itself is doing before executing this piece of code. Okay, what it does is that it would verify if there are any variables declared, where variables are declared or not. If the where variables are declared, they would be hoisted. It is invisible. They are hoisted, and the default value that gets assigned to where variables is undefined. Okay. So let me pull back to the previous function. Okay, so now thing is that so what is going to be logged? So let us suppose, yes, don't think that t this time. Okay, t is being declared in the inner function. Okay, and trying to be consumed in the outer function. Okay, what's the value of t?
Undefined.
See, we are trying to pull the value of t. We haven't defined it. If I declare like okay, if I declare var t, then I can think t being existed in this function scope. Otherwise, at least if I declare in the parent scope, global scope, then I think t being declared in the global scope before I am pulling the value of t. Because but now here I am not declaring this var variable in the function f scope or in the global scope. It is being declared in the inner function scope. What is the value of t? I am trying to pull the value of t before its declaration. It is not assignment part. If it is assignment part, in such a case, the global scope would declare the variable T. But it is pulling part. It is trying to access the data that T is holding. It is referencing. So
Yeah, reference error variable is not defined.
excellent. So here we do get reference error because the variable itself is not defined, but you are trying to consume it, right? Any doubts?
So this variable hosting is
Because
will only for that function scope.
one second. Let me pick the rest. You this time you. Okay, you are saying something, please.
So the variable hosting concept will applicable only for particular scope.
Excellent, correct. The variable hosting works only for the specific scope, where the variables are being declared. So if it is not declared with var keyword and directly being declared in this way, in such a case, it is going to be global variable. Okay, that pollutes the scope, actually, the global scope itself. That's why we use strict. Otherwise, we do declare variables properly, right? So this is the variable that is being declared inside the function f, okay, inner f. So it can't be accessed in the outer scope. So now what would be the value of u? Reference error. Sometime back you have mentioned, one of you mentioned reference error, okay? Don't get confused. Sometimes you may see values being populated. The reason is that the state is being maintained for those variables because they are in the global scope, right? We can see global scope dot some p. I'm not sure whether I have defined p or not, but I have defined s. Not. Well, I don't want to discuss about this one, but thing is that that is secondary part. Major thing is that don't get confused if already existing data gets populated. Okay, don't focus on it. Okay, try to create new variables so that you will see the accurate information. Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
So what is the value of x? Before you are giving any answer, let me explain you this. So the time when you are creating var variable has only two scopes. One is function scope, another one is global scope. If it is declared inside the block scope, in such a case, there is no scope for the block. It is available to the scope where this block is declared. Okay, so now the var variable is being declared in this block. Okay, this is the for loop is a block basically. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm defining a function ff this time. So if you declare in this way, the var variable gets declared in the global scope. If you keep the same thing inside this function, the variable gets declared in the function scope. Okay, so here we are doing iteration. Okay, we are doing some work. Okay, what I'm saying is it doesn't have block scope. It is not limited to this block. It is not just limited to this block, right? So if it is not limited to this block, it means that it is limited to this function scope. The var variables are not limited to block scope. They are limited to function scope and global scope. Now this var variable is going to be the function variable, not the block variable. Okay, you may do some kind of work here. After two iterations, right? 0. Okay, first iteration is correct actually. And 1. Okay, 1 is less than 2, correct. And then 2. The time when x is 2. Okay, 2 is less than 2. Okay, it is wrong. Then it is coming out of that loop. The condition is false. So x, the value of x is 2 because it is not specific to this block. Because this is not specific to this block. Okay. So the var is being declared inside the function. Though you declare inside the though you declare var variable inside a block, that is being treated as a function scope variable. Okay. So the value of x is going to be 2 here. Why didn't it populated? Tell me the reason. So I'm running this code, but I don't see any value. Why? You know why?
You are not
You
calling
have
the
not called.
function.
Excellent. So now I am calling the function. Okay, 2 is the value, right? So you understood. So x is not block scoped. Let me ask you this one. STUV this time. Okay. So what is the value of V? What can we see that is being logged here? It is a block scope basically. Okay, it is a block scope. It is not function scope. Okay. The time when var variables are created inside a block scope, they are not limited to that specific block scope. Okay. They are available to the scope where this block is existent. Experiment, answer. Okay.
Yeah,
So that
it
you,
will be two, right?
yeah, why?
Because this is a block scope, you said, right? It is available access to global scope,
Yeah,
so we
excellent. The
don't have
reason is
any.
that, yeah, so this block is created in the global scope. Inside the block, we are creating a var variable, but var variables are not limited to blocks. Their scope is function scope, they are function scope and global scope. Okay. So that's why we do see 2 being logged here. Any doubts? Do you have any doubts?
No.
Okay, good. So you understood. Either declares a variable with function scope or block scope. Okay, blocks global scope in the sense, if it is outside any function, then it is a global scope. Okay, so the var keyword can be redeclared. Okay, we have seen it can be redeclared. We saw x being already existed in global scope, global this, but we tried with some other value. Okay, so the redeclaration won't be any problem with var variable, and we can do anyway reassignment. We can do reassigning, right? And at the same time, it will be hoisted to the top of the existing scope, the enclosing scope. Okay, that too limited to function scope or global scope, not block scope, right? This is our understanding. At the same time, we know how to stop polluting global scope using use strict. Okay, the time when we use strict, it makes sure that the variables are scoped. The variables are scoped, right? Any questions, doubts, right? So I thought to discuss more, but we covered only var part. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I am concluding this session for now. Okay, so okay, have any questions or anything to discuss? Okay. Okay. Thanks, team. Thank you, guys.